the slides will be up any moment. It feels like home. Yes, waiting for the slides to show up in front of the audience. So, in group one, we discussed, well, this theme, vanishing borders and the need for a new lawyer, the challenge of global skills. And as you will see from the slides, yeah, okay, we concentrated on identifying skills that would be useful. So we had a discussion also in general of what we mean by global law, what we are doing in our various institutions. So we will put forward a list of skills on which we agreed, some open issues that we want to flag, and then concrete recommendations as to how we could collaborate. And I talked to people in the other groups. I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of overlap between the groups, but we go first. Yeah. So global legal skills. What did we identify, or what did we discuss? In general, let's say the general type of skills that you would want to give the students in our global law programs would be learning to learn. So students who are able to confront unknown legal systems, unknown issues, and still find their way out, as opposed to what a lot of us do now, which is to learn the law of a specific jurisdiction. It was mentioned also by the participants that it's important that for the global market to give students good research skills for different jurisdictions, because since they might not be equipped with the knowledge of positive law, they will have to find it out. So they will need to be equipped with good research skills. Interdisciplinarity was identified also as an essential element, essential skill for a global legal market. You will see the skills are not exactly in a logical order. It's the order in which we noted them. So while in terms of teaching, everyone converged on the idea that the teaching should move to a different approach, where it's not so much teaching about the law, but rather the policy and the principles level. That's our fifth bullet point. So we need, you see that they're interrelated. It's part of learning to learn. If you know about the law, if you know rather policy and principles underlying the law, then you're in a better position to jump into an unknown situation, an unknown legal system, and find your way out. So the teaching should be pitched at policy principles level so that students learn to learn. But of course, that should come in parallel with a good appreciation of different contexts, so that students are able to realize, well, the context is important. There's more to life than law, than the rules. You have to see in which context they are applied, and context might differ quite a lot between jurisdictions. And again, we generally agreed that the way the teaching should be organized should be in case method, so with the emphasis on problem-solving skills. So I doubt that any of this is very controversial. We will see later some suggestions as to how we could operationalize this. Then we discussed, well, how can we structure a global curriculum? And there we didn't have any consensus emerging, but we spent some time discussing whether a similar approach can be followed at undergraduate and graduate level, or whether we should not split the undergrad and the grad level with different approaches. And it also means, in the context of the Global League, perhaps different means of working together, depending on whether we look at undergrad or postgrad programs. One point which we discussed, and it connects to the discussion we just had over lunch as well, was how to articulate the local and the global dimension. And there is controversy, I think, in academia about this, and of course in our group also we have different points of view. So you could do either start with learning, so start local, learning the law of a specific jurisdiction, and then move to global, But I think a number of us are also seeking to innovate by turning it around. So starting the studies with a global perspective, and then you branch into one specific jurisdiction. The advantage of the second one being that it tends to bring legal studies more in line with what is done in other comparable disciplines, where you learn economics, psychology, sociology as a global science, and later you learn about specific practices or customs wherever you decide to locate. Okay, then in parallel to the discussion of principles, so skills, trying to see whether we agreed as to which type of skills were needed, we also try to list concrete suggestions as to how we could work together within the Global League to make it work, to make these skills taught in our programs. In terms of context, the idea with the Global League, I think everyone shared this, was to move from a bilateral to a plurilateral approach, where it's not done on a school-to-school basis, but rather within the network, which opens interesting possibilities. Amongst the possibilities that were suggested were summer schools, and I say summer school because the rule we envisioned is wherever it is held, it must be summer. Okay. That's the only condition. So that leaves some flexibility on the calendar. The summer school could be based on case studies. The idea would be to bring some students from the various nodes of the network together with a number of faculty, and then have a summer school on a specific theme. And that's something you want to...
I want to ask a question.
Oh, yes?
Do you envision them to be for credit, or is that not important in the way you think of the summer school?
We did not bring it that far, but yeah, it's an interesting issue. Another suggestion was to have a moot court, so the Global League moot court, so to say. And then we thought, well, what kind of problem do we do? And it didn't take too long for us to imagine cases that we could put in such a moot court. Typically an intellectual property issue, the extension of the EU trading scheme to non-EU airlines. So there are plenty of cases where you could do a problem that would interest students from our various institutions. And we suggested even perhaps force the students to plead the side that they would not naturally associate with, so to say. Condensed programs were also suggested, typically, so short visits from one or the other faculty member to another node of the network. At master's level, we discussed a suggestion that was made in earlier discussions about, as a first step that would not be too organizationally complicated to implement, doing exchanges at master's level and issuing our own degrees, but complement them with a certificate. So this student has a Tilburg master's and did a law school Global League exchange, so has this law school Global League certificate. And in the longer term, I think it's not something that can be implemented necessarily overnight, but looking at joint degrees. And beyond that, we looked at other possibilities for the global schools. So I cannot get the, sorry. Over there, I have to point. Okay, sorry. One very good and interesting function that the Global League could have would be to enable us to create groups to exchange on how we understand the global in our disciplines. Because it was clear from the discussion within the group, we have some common ground, but we still have no clear understanding of what global law means. What is the global in global law? And that could be done even by discipline. So we spent a lot of time in our group. I think by coincidence we had a number of tort lawyers. So we discussed how we could teach, what would be in a tort law course if it was taught at a global level. So that's something that we could usefully do within the Global League. bring together the tort law professors to discuss how they do this, what kind of approach they take. We could also use the Global League for research on the impact of global law in practice. All of this, of course, with a view to the last point. So we spent some time discussing the obstacles, the resistance. We all experience resistance internally, but we all also experience a greater willingness internally in our respective institutions to go ahead with global law programs. However, the resistance now is rather external. We went through all the complications that we had from various authorities. It differs from one country to the other. But one thing is sure, we could use the Global League as a place, not just so that we don't feel alone, but also towards the outside world, as a place for dialogue with authorities on the significance of global law, to impress upon our respective authorities, look, we're not just inventing this. There are law schools all around the world, and the top ones who are doing the same. So please listen to us about regulatory obstacles. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I had the chance of going first, so I assume I preempted some of the content of the other groups, with my apologies for this, but this was what we discussed in Group 1. Thank you.
Right, so good afternoon again. I'll try to make a very brief presentation of our group. These are the members, and then I'll ask the colleagues to complement or correct what I'll say in a second. So we have first, in terms of main issues, 3 topics. The methodological aspect, right? So all our schools are involved in methodological innovation, right? We are trying to teach law in new ways. Now, how does being global impact our methodology? In what sense does that transform or change or enhance what have we been doing so far? Are we going to be doing just the same thing on a global scale? Or does the fact of being global add to what we can do in terms of methodology? So this is an issue, something we have to think about. Of course, it has to do with materials. For every methodological option we make, we need materials to support, to promote this option, to have the classroom working, students working. What kind of materials would be more suitable, more interesting, more effective for this global audience that has this new dimension to it, which is different from the students we have nowadays? And of course, the impact on research. Well, of course, we have joint research going on for a long time, but maybe we can have a new twist on that. So the first family, so to say, of issues is methodological, right? Then there's a second one, which is theoretical. And of course, a lot has been preempted, so much so that Group 1 could go straight to Group 3. I could skip my talk here. It's theoretical. Meanings of globalization. Globalization is by no means a well-defined concept. It's a widely used concept, but not very well-defined concept. Is globalization something that makes the world more homogeneous, more actable, less homogeneous? Is globalization the same in every area of life? Is globalization perceived the same way in different parts of the world by different social strata? When we talk about globalization, what are we talking about exactly? Is there one kind of globalization? Are there many kinds of globalization? We have, of course, had already some important critique of some models of globalization. Be as it may, this is one issue that I think is important that we as a group face. And then, of course, the goals of education, which has a lot to do with, of course, all the other groups. What do you want? What do you want to teach, and why you want to teach it and not something else? So what is the goal of education? Being education to lead people somewhere. So what are goals in terms of education? Do we have to have all the same goals, one fundamental goal which is the same and different goals? So that's something we have to bear in mind and discuss as a group, I think would be good to do though. And then, of course, very importantly, there are practical issues we have to face. First, it's language, right? English is, as Oscar mentioned, the lingua franca, right? So how do we prepare students for that? Will that translate into having students in our law schools or our programs who can only be proficient in English apart from their native languages? Are going to give some support for them to have the language or not? What is implied in this process? Also the tuition. Okay, it's great to have joint programs. It's great to have people moving around the world to teach. But then Dr. Paulo is here, right? He mentioned in the morning that, yes, there are people who are saying, okay, but there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So who's going to pay for that? How, where? So that's something that, of course, we can work out together, but it's something that we have to bear in mind. It won't resolve of itself. And then, of course, the bar. Bar associations are very conservative, as usually, right? And they will probably present some degree of resistance to innovation. At least Brazilian experience, and I think some other colleagues have said things along that lines, is that bar associations tend to be very resistant and conservative. So these are the issues we mapped in broad strokes. And from these came some suggestions, that we have. So, of course, joint teaching seems to be a great thing. Many of us have had the experience of translate into research. That's a joint thing. We'll also translate or be prepared by conferences. And one thing that people mentioned, I think was very important, it's legal clinics. Legal clinics with co-teaching legal clinics would give a tremendous opportunity for a very, very real, concrete experience of the problems of this multi-jurisdiction world. So legal clinics seems to be a fairly simple way and productive way of making this project take off. And of course, a joint LLM would be the dream, right? To have something that is really joint in the sense that students can take credits here, credits there, travel around, experience different realities. So this is, of course, a proposal by all means, right? Then a focus on global view of law, right? We have to specify disciplines and the influence on other disciplines and this theoretical problem-based approach. So what kind of disciplines do you want in this kind of course? We thought of two main types. One is very practical. Once in our courses, we tend to teach by using problem-solving, case study. Probably this would be a good way to start our global law school league, to have our subjects, our disciplines based around concrete issues. However, it's important also that we together try to contribute to a theoretical framework for law and globalization or global law, right? So this is theoretical and problem-based approach. Okay, and finally, yes, that's something that Professor Lesaffer has been insisting on. The traditional method tends to be mono-jurisdiction, right, and mono-methodological, right? So things go together. So it is very important that if you are a varied group of people, cultures of jurisdictions, that also our methodological options reflect this, and we don't have just one magic way of teaching. And another important thing is, if you're going to put this project together, we have to map the resistance that the bar will offer and think of strategies for countering this kind of resistance. I think that also has been mentioned, right, in the first group. And finally, it would be great if we could also try to develop a transnational theory on globalization in the sense of globalization is, as I said, can be so many things. Now, how does globalization shape law? And how does law shape globalization? What kind of meaning law can imprint to globalization and vice versa? I think we have a wealth of reflection here, it would be great to bring this together and offer this as a theoretical contribution. This is what I summarize. I don't know whether some of my colleagues wants to correct or complement. Sorry? Okay, so thank you very much. And that's group 3.
So, I'll be speaking for group 3, and I didn't prepare any slides because my slides have already been prepared and presented by the previous 2 speakers. As you could see at this point, there's a lot of overlap, and the overlap speaks to something that we all sense, that we understand the issues pretty similarly. Something that came up in our group, and I think was already reflected in the previous 2 presentations, is that although we all consider ourselves as grown-ups in the sense that we are well aware of globalization or globalization challenge to law schools, we nevertheless are still making baby steps in dealing with these issues. And what we were able to produce in our group was no more than first baby steps towards addressing those issues, in the sense that we could only identify the issues that call for addressing, because we wanted to leave something for Tilburg and perhaps beyond that. So the fundamental question of our group, and we spent some time even discussing the title of our working group, which was Law School and Global Markets, Global Local Tensions and Institutional Changes in the Legal Education, is how is a law school to globalize, and what are the tensions? Notwithstanding the fact that the tensions were defined as global-local, we were still in a position where we asked ourselves, what exactly are the problems? What are the tensions? So these are only beginnings, or the design issues that need to be addressed. So one major design factor that needs to be addressed is the level of globalization, or the level of globalizing legal education. And some of the potential answers or the potential aspects that need to be dealt with have already been mentioned. So one question that came up is, at what stage should the world be brought in legal education? One proposal was, or one suggestion, all of the suggestions, of course, reflect practices in one or more schools that we come from. So one suggestion was it should be in all courses. This was thanks to a provocative point made by Oscar. Why not deal with global legal issues at the very beginning, because they help us think about the fundamental legal problem. And that, of course, led to the question, is it an issue for the curriculum working group or the structure working group, namely ours? And the answer is probably both, or the 3 of them. And as we could see, the issue appeared in all 3 presentations. Another suggestion that already has been mentioned is, should globalization be dealt with at the LLB or the LLM stage, the undergraduate or the graduate, postgraduate stage? We don't have an answer. We don't have an answer for reasons that we have already heard about, and some more. One thing that did come up was, is there room for a cosmopolitan law school or cosmopolitan legal education? Something that would be one way to resolve the tension between the global and the local is to detach at least some sense of legal education from the local. I have my own views, but people, I think, left the issue pretty much open for discussion. A major issue that came up in our group and has already been mentioned is regulation. All of us face a certain set of constraints that are set by the bar or the government or both, and the solutions cannot be adopted, regardless of the local regulatory environment. So in that sense, there will never be any detachment from the local, because we derive our authority, our formal authority, from local regulations and local legal systems. I mean, those are the systems that create us as law schools. A point that came up, and in fact was the point that motivated my question about stratification of law schools, is what about the general practice? Should a globalized law school, or should globalized legal education be targeting only an elite group of lawyers serving inevitably an elite group of clients? And in that case, are we giving up, or are we supposed to be giving up on the general practice, on the common citizen legal problems? Another way to put it is, again, referring to the issue of stratification, is that, and the context in which it arose in our working group was whether we should exchange students or on a voluntary or on a compulsory basis, or should we exchange professors. Is it inevitable that a globalized law school would become a rich kid law school? That was my phrasing, because it entails a lot of costs and a lot of logistics, and some schools might be even be able to do that, but may not want to do this on a principled basis, beyond the logistical and financial challenges. Which led to the issue when we talk about tensions between the local and the global. What about the mission of what should be done about the mission of a law school as a social agent, as a socialization agent? Because we are in the business, or in the mission of educating lawyers as social agents, very important social agents. If we globalize, are we not neglecting the local lawyers, in a way suggesting that they are less important? And an extension of that that I'm contributing now, because it didn't arise during discussions, but I see it as a natural extension, is that, and it is related to the issue of moot courts and other aspects that have been mentioned by the previous two speakers. Business is fine, and major international business transactions definitely raise issues of global law and globalization and so on. But what about other areas? What about human rights and international human rights? What about criminal law and international criminal law? I suppose nobody will make the argument that we should neglect those aspects. But if we do, then again, that once we consider our mission and our goals as including those aspects as well, the tensions between the local and the global again come up as significant ones. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Since we have no structure previously established for the debates, I think we should just jump in, picking specific points and try to organize some conclusions for the last session. So feel free to join the discussion, or to make questions for the groups, or to address some specific. I'm eager to address most of your points, but I will wait for others. Yeah, please. Henrique. Oh.
Thank you very much. I would go back to what Amir said about stratification and subjects to be concerned or to be thought in a global perspective. I think this is a very nuclear issue, because from there we can think about where we want globalization studies, in the graduate level, in the postgraduate level. Do we want to replace local? Do we want to have them living together? Because I think what you said, I mean, concerning, for instance, human rights or other issues that we wouldn't directly associate to global law, can have their space, and that doesn't mean that we compromise. We don't compromise them, and we don't compromise local law if we intelligently accommodate the teaching of global law within our law schools. And again, coming back to what I said, that raises one question, which is, first of all, to know where we want to start regarding global law and the teaching of global law. And of course, what is global law? Do we want to start at the graduate level? Do we want to start at the postgraduate level? Should we be more ambitious at the postgraduate level, less ambitious at the graduate level? In order to accommodate local law, in order to accommodate subjects that are not directly related to what we think is global law. So I think what you said is, in fact, the stratification of schools, the stratification of practice, I think is a key issue, really. And from there we should discuss everything, really. So.
Just one clarification, a personal clarification. I work in from a field, or I'm active in a field that is the easiest, the most natural. I do comparative corporate governance and international securities regulations, so that's an easy one for a global law school. What I was suggesting is that we should not be too quick to give up on the more difficult issues. I mean, the league should not be framed as the kind of the rich kid, big law firm, business-oriented kind of league, and essentially leave the field open for other actors who would, are welcome to address the same issues, but we should not be giving up on those.
Maybe pick up what you said about stratification and then what Pierre said about going from local to global or global to local. I think if we look at the strategy we're following, there's two markets appearing. And our idea is that our, let's say, Dutch language bachelor-master structure is, of course, departing from the local, and then you build in more and more global perspective, and we can do that better than we do that now. The new Bachelor of Global Law we're doing is indeed doing the other way around. The assumption is, of course, that when you start with a global perspective on law, then students should be able, in a graduate level, quite quickly to master a national jurisdiction, allowing them maybe 5 or 10 years later to move somewhere and do a second. Of course, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating in the future. So it's, to some extent, a very big experiment. But I don't think we should think about the discussion in exclusive terms. I think there will be a market for the two kinds of lawyers in the future, and that should not necessarily mean a hierarchy in terms of stratification only. Maybe that's optimist, but...
Okay, so I will also jump on this discussion of the stratification that Amir has started in the small group. I think this is perhaps one of the most excruciating questions, not just for someone who is working on the direction of creating a more globalized legal education, but any kind of good education. Good education costs a lot, and there are several barriers. Our countries are very different. In some countries, the barriers are higher than in others. In some countries, you have the presence of the state, which subsidize part of the education. In other countries, families pay for their... In the other countries, families don't pay, but the students get this money, then have a lot of trouble to pay in the future. So I think the problem of cost is beyond the question of globalization, is a question of good education. And all our schools in one way or another face. I think some countries, I think of Colombia, Brazil, and South Africa, that are countries that are where deep inequality is structural. For rich kids, it's easy to get there. But for the largest part of the population, it's very difficult to get in.
That's true. We face the same issue.
I don't want to interpret your countries, but I imagine that by the level of stratification that you have in society, we face similar problems. So I think this is a structural problem, and I don't know how to solve it besides let's try to fundraise and have better level of scholarships and try to be more inclusive in our process of selection, etc. My conversation with the president of the association of the law firms here when I left, I was explaining, not talking about this, I was just talking about our program of scholarships and how they would help us on this.
Maybe by tuition aid.
Yeah.
So if we could get the big law firms to legitimize such a league through tuition aid, that could be one way to address the issue. Because we all face it. I mean,
I think this is, we all face, and it's a problem that goes beyond the discussion of globalization.
Yeah, it's a general
issue. Returning to the issue of globalization, I don't see this as necessarily an elitist perspective. Why? Because globalization is affecting a whole branch of issues that comes from, and you mentioned, human rights, environmental issues, trade, which is, a key problem to define who will become rich and who will become poor. Intellectual property, they're called the petroleum of the 21st century. So I think to prepare lawyers that have a better understanding of the impact of globalization doesn't mean necessarily prepare business lawyers.
Yes, I agree.
Obviously, business lawyers are an important part of the package.
I would argue even family lawyers.
Huh?
Even family lawyers need to know about
labor lawyers, etc. So I don't feel trapped in this way. I think we could move calmly, with tranquility, to a globalization without the fear of becoming necessarily elitist. I think we could give an immense contribution for those lawyers who are regulating, that are state lawyers. I think we could give an immense contribution for NGO lawyers that could improve their impact in discussing these issues. So that's how I would divide the thing of stratification.
I would just like to add on what you were saying. I think there are two ways to see the relationship between globalization and the law. You can see globalization as an outside and an exogenous phenomenon, and the question is, how do we, as lawyers, react to it? And then, of course, we need to define what globalization is, and there's a risk that indeed it might become a way for us to move in the direction of certain interests. But I think you can also see it with an endogenous perspective and say, well, look, it's something we would like to do as lawyers, irrespective of what happens outside. We just want to also globalize, so to say, and then I think there's less of a need to have a clear definition of what globalization is. It's more an issue of how do we do our own, how do we practice our own occupation. We want law to be taught in a different way than just by reference to a national system.
As a matter of establishing principles of a league like this, I think what Amir is putting is we should have a great concern that by being more globalized, it does not mean being just business-oriented law.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
That this is a concern. And this concern should be presented in the moot courts that we will do, in the courses that we will create together to have courses on issues that are of social relevance. I don't know if this is what the direction we are going.
That was the spirit. I mean, we all in the group, we didn't have answers. These are questions that we thought need to be addressed. My own view is identical to yours, and I'll be even more explicit in the sense that we don't want, in my mind, I wouldn't want the league to be framed as catering only to big M&Es, because I think that beyond marketing and imaging and so on, that goes in a way a little bit against the mission of a law school as an important socialization agent, especially when you think about the role of law schools in promoting rule of law and a legally based or law-based social order. I think member law schools in the league should not give up on the local. Quite the contrary.
And not give up on the hard social issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. Local could be elitist.
Exactly. I personally I could justify again because I'm kind of in my academic work, I deal with M&Es. I could justify the position based on the fact that a lot of M&As, a lot of foreign direct investment involves serious problems of international human rights and so on. But I wouldn't want to do this. I don't want to justify international human rights as an excuse for dealing with business. These stand on their own feet. Yeah. I understand.
If I may add to that, I think it's an enormous important principal point that we would say globalizing law doesn't mean making it more elitist, neither for the students recruit, neither for the clients you service. I'll give an example of how globalization can work in all directions. We have in Tilburg a program within the Department of Private Law, Access to Justice, or even better, microjustice as microfinance, working about how creating access to justice for the most poor people, not only in Europe, but in the world. And what you see is that many, let's say, lessons learned from international arbitration, to some extent, can be easily implemented in local dispute resolution in African tribes and so on and so forth. So it can work, globalization, in a very broad perspective, which was a very surprising conclusion for the professors leading the project when they started 10 years ago.
Just to organize a little bit of debate, if we are in agreement with this perspective, I think this is an important point, that when we would start to draft the league, I don't know, bylaws or whatever, this could be one of the principles. A principle could be formulated in this way. Is that?
I believe so. Yeah.
We have one,
Can I add
Joaquin,
and just very quickly, given I'm in the business of trying to sell the league to the members of the entire law school, there's so many departments that are not business law who want to be part of this, and who don't want it to be exclusive only for the business lawyers. But I think that it's actually the only way, and it's also why we wanted to work with partners who have a breadth of areas. So.
I think we have a consensus.
Yeah.
Joaquin.
Just two brief comments on this. Brazil became independent from Portugal in 1822, and in 1824 the parliament has to decide few resources available where to invest in education. There are three possibilities: literacy, second-range technician, and lawyers. Two law schools. The decision of the parliament was to create two law schools. One in Olinda was the first, São Paulo was the second. And why that? Because we need a state bureaucracy to deal with the new country, to deal with the independence. So law schools in Brazil were created deeply influenced in a global factor, the independence of the country. But not to become lawyers as business lawyers, as state bureaucracy, up to now. And with a little small detail, under the British rule of the seas, liberalism, Protestant liberalism in a Catholic country. Okay, this is my point. I mean, even when you have global interest, you have local needs. And this changes everything. So instead of talking about local and global, we decide to talk because this is a insoluble, it's a non-ended discussion from a theoretical point of view. So we better discuss about the agendas, what the agendas of a law school will decide. And what's the difference from the word of yesterday to the word of today is because we live in a multilateral world with multilateral agendas. And when we talk about global, only focus on business lawyers, we are talking about a unilateral agenda of the past. I think it's important today, but it's not the only one. I'm talking about environment. I'm talking about consumers' protections. I'm talking about democracy. I'm talking about technology. Those items, they are all globals. And by the way, those are the items that we decided in our law school, our agenda. But they are mainly local. So we have a local global agenda. That is, what means to us is the agenda in a multilateral world. In a multilateral world, we cannot talk about, we may talk, but stratification is not the rule. Diversity is the rule. Reciprocity is the rule. So I myself, and our colleagues here, I have Carlos Afonso as the head of the Center of Technology and Society. We got, we support this SOAP, Carlos Afonso is there, blackout 2 years ago was against the American project of in the Congress. We are against the three-strike law of French internet. These are a global issue, but it's local for us because it may affect us. So what I think it's important is to have, in this world of diversity, multilateralism, agendas that will be diverse. Each law school with the other. Some will be law schools for the elite, for the business people. Others will have different paths. So in this discussion of stratification, and we talk more about diversity, and the discussion about local and global, we talk about what is the agenda that my interest in a multilateral world. This is just the 2 points.
So I think that's a very important point that you make in terms of agenda. And I'd like to perhaps add something else to the discussion. It seems that, of course, 2 things came up. One is the topic area, business, environmental, human rights. And the other is this local, global thing. So it seems to me that, and I'm thinking here about maybe in 2 practical terms, but in very practical terms, what kind of course are we planning here, right? And it seems to me that if there's something that is different from the old tradition of comparative law, right, is that comparative law, in a way, assumed that there were two legal systems that were, in a way, unconnected, and they were self-contained and well-defined, and then you would put system A here and system B there, and that will be comparative law. You find something there. I don't think this holds true anymore, right? So it seems to me that I may be wrong, but something that everybody's sort of touching upon here is that we are interested in some sort of interspace. Interspace is the interdisciplinary space, so it's not exactly 2 or 3 legal systems, but it's the in between them. It's the common points, and the same thing. It's in between place between traditional topics. Where does business law start, and environmental law start, and human rights law start? So, and this may be a challenge, but also an opportunity for us. Maybe we don't have to replicate national law schools on a global level. Maybe we can have a syllabus and subjects that are radically different in the sense that they do not teach stable subjects, but focus more on this dynamic process we tend to call globalization. So I think that more than thinking about what kind of subjects we may think, it's more of defining areas of conflict, areas of instability, and modes of leading with this instability and problems and conflict. That might be a good way of thinking of our individual courses. So it would go a step beyond broadcasting our own courses to a global audience. It's actually reshaping the way we think the courses, because we are global in the sense, multilateral, as has been said. So it's just a suggestion that maybe we can think of our course less along the traditional topic lines, but identify some conflict points, some tensions, and some different responses to these tensions, and create a radically new way of talking about law. This could in itself be a contribution, I think. I don't know, just because I think of the agenda that you mentioned, which I think is very important to move forward. But that's what I was thinking here. It's when we talk about topics, we see they have no clear borders. When we talk about jurisdictions, they have no clear borders. International law. So if you're talking about this interspace, why not create this different kind of perspective in our courses? Sorry.
So from your talk, I think we are moving to this discussion of how we are establishing perhaps the best practices in terms of including the global perspective on our education.
Absolutely, and not only.
I'm trying to make a difference between the discussion that we have read. We already achieved a kind of agreement. So
yes.
We are moving on to a different group.
Yeah, I see that there's a consensus there, right? Yes, okay. Yes. I think there's a consensus there. What I'm saying is that not only how we include the global perspective in our teaching, but how this translates, how this transforms the way we think about teaching. So what I'm saying is that I think that's a consensus in terms of principles. I think we're pretty much on the same page. Now, second thing is, okay, once we agree on this principle, it is something important for us. It's a value for us, right? So what kind of course, what kind of things do we want to discuss in this group, and how we want to do this? That's what I'm saying.
May I ask you something, just in the way of how we proceed from now on? The first two groups that discuss methodology, that discuss curriculum, that discuss how we introduce the international on the local education, etc. Are we willing to perhaps have a website where this kind of experience could be presented, so we share the best practices? Is that the direction that we should go?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Randall, if I may so, has even mentioned this today in our
yes.
group, right? So I don't know when you want to elaborate on that one.
Well, we're getting a bit more practical, I would say, which is good. I think at some point, maybe in the last meeting, we can start thinking about how we move from here and organize things. But a website might indeed be a good idea as a kind of a forum we could organize for members of the league. To do maybe two things. First, constantly inform one another about what we do, in terms of publications that are relevant, teaching methods that are new and relevant, new programs we develop. So kind of a constant information channel about everything which is relevant to globalization of law we do. And secondly, it might of course be a discussion forum. We could set up maybe in committees or groups to move along the different aspects of discussions. I think in Pierre's presentation he made a triple division of, let's say, the content of that discussion in the short run. Understand what is globalization and what does it mean for different disciplines, if I repeat well. The impact of globalization on legal practice. And then maybe starts a dialogue first among one another, and then maybe with the authorities about the role of bars and other authorities for or in, let's say, our innovation of global legal education. So it might be maybe kind of a combination of small committees from members, not only the people here, but professors from our different faculties who are most interested, and a kind of constant information and discussion forum on a website. And in these days, that's not the most difficult thing to organize, of course.
I think it's a
might
basic.
be a very practical
That's why
way of
saying,
organizing.
It would be basic. We have already the first material for the website, which will be the interviews that you are giving. And
of course, it would mean one thing if we do that everybody commits, let's say, to the website, so that everybody mobilizes within his own law school people to post and channels it one way or another, so that we have all very different organizations in size and form of organization. But we'll need then, of course, if we want to do that fruitfully, a kind of common commitment, because nothing is worse than a website that is updated once a year and that's it.
I hate you.
Can I just interrupt? We've been discussing the 3 groups, and now we seem to be discussing the league, but it might be nice to get some coffee first, otherwise the program ends very soon. And yeah, you can, of course...
Before we get to coffee, because I think maybe the coffee can help.
Yes.
I mean, the discussion that we have here so far is very interesting, and some contributions, very valuable contributions, were made to something that we are not really addressing, which is the concept of globalization. Because I think we have to all agree in what is globalization. Because, for instance, we began talking about topics in the beginning. I think we all were thinking about business. And 5 minutes later, we were saying, okay, environmental law, consumer law, human rights. But globalization is what? Is it international law? Is it comparative law? Of course not. It's more than that. But then, if it's more than that, what it is? I think if we are going to move to create a website, the first thing we need to have is a definition of the globalization of law, and then from there, moving forward, of course. And I think if we are creating Law Schools Global League, the first thing we need to agree on is what is globalization. I don't know if the coffee will help, but I think at least the question should be addressed, and we should have some common thoughts about globalization.
Okay, may I react to you in my crudest way? I don't see that this is an extremely necessary definition. We don't need to achieve a definition. We start law schools without knowing what is justice. We have been discussing what is justice for 2,000 years, and we work law schools, and we are trying to solve problems. So my perception is that this could create an obstacle. I think we could operate with some kind of definition. We suffer. You know, the example that you gave today about the guy selling wine. Each of us could give 100 examples of the same sort in our experience as lawyers, as professors. So in some ways we understand aspects of globalization. Perhaps we would never be able to define in the strict terms. I'm sorry. I'm just. No. I'm trying to save the. I'm trying to save the meeting. Even if I'm wrong, it can be an argument.
Oscar, I know you want to break for coffee, but maybe I can just jump in for 1 second, because this is actually, this terminology issue has been a big issue for NYU. John Sexton has been using the term global and local, because he was sick, I think, of the fights about all of this. And we actually, on the law faculty, had a challenge because all of our programs had originally been under the tag, this is 10 years ago, international. And then we had a very big debate about renaming. Actually, you'll see on our website, we've got the global tab now. But there was a big debate about what to call that tab, because some people wanted it to say transnational, some people wanted it to say international, transnational, and comparative. I mean, we just went on, and we finally just called it global because it sounded vague. And there was an advantage to that because there was a lot you could subsume under that. So I just wanted to put out there that I think that one of the things we could potentially do is try to draft a definition, with the idea being that the website actually could be in some sense a forum. It's always helpful to have a straw man to react to when it comes to these things, and it almost might be the kind of thing where you could get really interesting engagement from people if you tried to articulate a very imperfect. I'm not saying that we should make this something that's necessary for the website. I'm just saying that as a general matter, possibly getting people to put something up there so that people can react to it might actually help to stimulate our faculty, our students. I don't know.
And I'm sorry. And in a very broad sense, I was not saying that we should define it in a strict sense, first of all, and second, because this was one of the discussions we were having in Group 1, is local authorities. I mean, you have to deal with them. They will ask you, what is globalization? You cannot just say, okay, I think it's... you have to have at least some definition, as broad as it might be, to just provide some ways of contacting with local authorities. If it was not for other reason, for this practical reason, it is justified.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. Perhaps I was just rude. It was not a smart... But my impression is that I don't think we should dream of having a perfect and a definitive definition. Okay, so we are in agreement. Perhaps what we should present to those who are interested in our enterprise is what are the impacts of this globalization that we can define very generically on the law. Well, this is something that matters for us, and we understand this. We understand this better than the economists that are defining globalization, the sociologists that are defining globalization. They have a general view, but we know exactly what happens at the wine store. Yeah, your wine. So perhaps I would agree to have this is the phenomenon that is happening and is impacting law. And if we could have just an instrumental discussion of this.
Oscar, another way to see and try to answer your question is let's not go to define what globalization is, etc. The League is global because the attitude of the members and the members are global. It's not the subject, because we are global. We want to go beyond our borders. And there is a group that represent different countries and different... this is global.
Professor, allow me. Does that convince the Bar Association? Imagine, we invite the president, the chairman of the Bar Association to one of our meetings, and we say, okay, we are global, you see? I mean...
Well, with a little help from our friends, I think that...
Just, I would like to reinforce the idea of Garcés in order to try to design new disciplines. Because this is very important, I guess. In my opinion, it's a crucial point, and for me, it's the way to go beyond all this discussion and try to figure out new disciplines and new subjects beyond the traditional ones. Okay? In economics, because this is my area, it's not so difficult. But in law, I guess it would be a tremendous challenge. Try to figure out the new disciplines for example, a joint program in the future. Okay.
I accept that the definition could go or could be based on examples. You know, it has not to be a closed definition.
Yeah.
But we need to have a definition.
I'd like to touch on a slightly different subject, but I think it relates to what Enrique has been saying. So in our discussion, the curriculum working group, we talked about creating new courses, new bodies of knowledge. And actually, I think that our working assumption was that we serve a single crowd, that is degree program students. But I think that as law schools, especially as the Law School Global League, we could serve other crowds as well. We could serve politicians, bureaucrats, we could serve NGOs, we could serve lawyers as part of continuing legal education. And we all know that academia has some clout even among politicians and bureaucrats, because there's something about academia which purports to be unbiased. And And people are eager. I think even politicians and bureaucrats are eager to learn from academia, especially when they can gain from the expertise of other systems. And this goes back in a way to the question, what agendas are we talking about? And obviously, if we talk about human rights, labor, immigration, and other issues, we as a global league can be a force that could serve NGOs, bureaucrats, lawyers, etc. And in many ways, practically speaking, it's going to be easier for us. If we can offer certificates, if we can offer, executive education, so to speak, our force as a global league, bringing on the experiences, and in a way, going back to Enrique's point, what is globalization? Probably this is an answer that can stem only from a dialogue, between us as legal educators and politicians and bureaucrats. What do you think the best practices as a policymaker, as a decision maker? What are the immigration policies that you should implement? What are the labor policies we should implement? What force do questions of international human rights have? So, coming up with a general definition of globalization may probably be a very brave endeavor, but I'm not sure very successful. But trying to actually speak with not only with law students, but with people who are now in the point of making decisions and being influenced by globalization in this sense is something that we can aspire for as academia, as law schools.
I mean, just to frame it differently, because I actually think the idea of trying to define globalization sounds just absolutely... the way I think of it and the way we've talked about it at NYU is to try to precisely or more precisely articulate the ways in which the globalization of the world economy has impacted the legal profession and will continue to, and then what the response, leading legal education institutions should have, like what should be the response of. That's how we have framed it, and I think when you make it as that sort of more precise question, then you can talk about empirical things, and it can become about sort of what is the ways in which you can be more descriptive at first, which might help to, I was going to say that examples are potentially the most helpful thing, I think, because in that way you're able to be more concrete. Anyways, so I just think maybe making it a more precise question would be helpful.